and thusness and the volume of isness. Is the volume working? I'm just going to assume it is. Oh, press the wrong button. Share screen. Window. Here we go. Happy Sunday. Welcome back. We are going to start really digging in and having a lot of fun. Feeling good about the foundation and starting to do a deeper dive into theory. We're still going to be in theory land this week and probably next week as well. And we will start to transition into technical, at least discussing the theory associated with certain practices or techniques that can help us absorb, integrate, recognize, familiarize why and how and what is going on. All right. Precious human life endowed with liberty and opportunity. May we make the most of this life. LFG, let's make the most of this life by studying Dharma. Let's make the most of this life by studying Dharma, by attempting to take down the wall between us and our environment, to recognize our environment as an integral part of ourselves, to recognize all of the inhabitants as integral parts of ourselves. Let's use this precious human life endowed with liberty and opportunity to feel a sense of connection to others, to become invested in others' well-being. Buddhist masters would say, why are we being micro dogs that sit on the couch, TikTok scrolling, acting like, whatever. May we make the most of our lives. Yes. Shout out to the lineage, classic mentors, giving their versions of, little fire under the booty in the form of the Vikings are coming. Why are you playing in the dirt? We got to go. The Vikings are coming. Why are you playing in the dirt? Either pick up your sword and help me hold this line, or let's get on these horses and go to the mountains. The Vikings are coming. Either pick up your sword or get on this horse, but we got to do something. Okay. How can we be certain that we are not the person fiddling around in the dirt while the Vikings are storming the village? Well, who are the, this is really the thing about who do you surround yourselves with. This is an indication of, if you are having difficulty seeing, if we have difficulty seeing ourselves, we should look to our closest companions and then just think that we're an amalgamation of that. And so how can we be certain? Well, maybe we need to make some choices about the type of conversations, type of locations we're inhabiting, etc. And so here we go with the magic land. I have referenced, I've said this in some of the more produced versions of these, that the truth is stranger than fiction. Please don't cancel me for what I'm about to say, but sometimes I listen to Joe Rogan, especially when he has on crazy conspiracy theorists and UAP theorists, and they're talking about multidimensional reality and whether or not aliens have always been here and they're shifting out in and out of dimensions, and whether or not consciousness is like a local or non-local phenomena, is everything, right? So in other words, the lineage has known this, since whatever the hell the beginning of this thing is. The lineage has been aware of the fact that the truth, reality, is much stranger and more magical and more amazing than it appears. And as we familiarize ourselves with more and more of what's going on, this computer, plant, road, person will start to appear to us, literally in a more and more magical form. So invitation for magic. I'm not wearing the magical hat, but invitation to magic. How do we know that we are actually in the type of space that is similar to the types of spaces that we hear the Buddha has thousands of bodhisattvas descended from all the perfume heavens, and the Buddha made all these magical things. How do we know that we're in an actual space, an actual Dharma space, and not some, blobbity bloobity blop blop? There is the smell test of the prime directive that we're not allowed, when we're in an authentic Dharma space, we are not allowed to believe anything. We must test everything. Each one of us is tasked with doing the heavy lifting of doing the work for ourselves. It's 100% DIY. And that's why I also call it, this is the most democratic form of education that has ever existed. We can literally work as hard as we want on our own ignorance. And if we're doing it the right way, we can work and see our own progress, see ourselves evolving. Anyway, so is the prime directive of the space that each of us should test the theory and practice for ourselves? Is the teaching touching our life experience? Is it touching our life experience? Is it pointing to using life experience? Are there members of that group actively working to write and comment on traditional literature and create contemporary literature? Are the members practicing debating with one another? What's up with the location in terms of modernity? Is it being packaged and presented using what's available, what's currently available and fresh in terms of what's socially fresh, right? So we forget that we either forget or we're not informed that that there's a story, there's a history of the Dharma, and it moves around, and as it moves around, it incorporates iconography, deity, different culture, language, music, fashion, artistry. The Dharma will, an authentic Dharma space will use what is socially relevant, what's fresh, right? And again, this points us back to the first thing about teaching from lived experience. What are the metaphors active that carry the most potency that people can connect with? Okay, so what's up with the location of the teaching or teacher in terms of modernity? Is what's being presented to us, is it challenging us? Is it actually challenging us to change, to improve ourselves for the better? Is it really challenging us? And then is it also, those things might feel blasphemous, but again, appearances can be deceiving. Something might appear to be traditional and might not be as traditional. Something might not appear on the surface to be traditional, but it may in fact be hyper or proto traditional, like original format. And so it's important for us as we're moving around, as we're becoming more and more and more interested in the Dharma, because we see the positive effects it has on our relationships to others, on our relationship to ourselves. It's essential that we can observe a Dharma space and recognize like how authentic it is, so we can decide whether or not we want to engage with it. Okay. We are going now to the fun stuff. I was saying that, the truth is stranger than fiction. And so when we go into subtle mind-body complex, or basically the universal vehicle, I have often called it Bodhisattva crazy land. So just hold on to your butts, because we're going into Bodhisattva crazy land. And if we don't have the foundation, or if anyone were listening, to this type of conversation for the first time, if we do not outline the foundation, it can really feel like we're going into sci-fi land. And I think there is a slide here called sci-fi. So hold on to your butts. Now it gets fun. Here we go. We are doing starting a first, going deeper into subtle mind-body complex, which means we're going deeper into the universal vehicle. In other words, the Mahayana, the great vehicle, the Bodhisattva vehicle. We're going to begin outlining the career of a Bodhisattva. And so just in case this is anyone's first time, there is an order to things everywhere, but there's an order to our practice. So Buddhist anatomy, when we're talking about the mind-body complexes, we're talking about what we call Buddhist anatomy or Buddhist, anatomy-psychology. In other words, the composition of us as beings. It's very helpful to have the foundation of these three concepts in place prior to discussing those things. The Dharma compass, the three principal aspects. The Dharma compass and the three principal aspects can literally be can take you to God, can take us to God, for lack of better words, can take us to reality. Those two, those two teachings together can do that. The third essential primer, let's say, for Buddhist anatomy is then familiarizing ourselves with the stages of the path. In other words, the individual vehicle, the Four Noble Truths, and the Eightfold Path, the universal vehicle, the concept of emptiness, origination, how sense of self arises, as well as then the implications of that ethically, the six aims of a bodhisattva. So familiarizing ourselves with those, which is what we've been doing for the past 8 weeks, basically, can prep us to have the discussion about a more nuanced and complex discussion about the universal vehicle. Here we go. Invitation to familiarize ourselves with coffee breaks. Really, what we're going to be digging into is how to mature into a heroic being that is actually capable of studying and practicing, in other words, living the lifestyle of the universal vehicle. So from this point on, really what we're going to be talking about all the time, basically, is how to mature, how we can mature ourselves, cook ourselves, what type of resistance is required in order for us to evolve ourselves, or from an alchemical point of view, what is the athan or the furnace? What constitutes creating that furnace in which I'm going to cook myself and evolve myself deliberately? In other words, how is it that I need to be living my life? What does study and practice and the lifestyle of the universal vehicle actually look like? So here we go. Invitation to familiarize ourselves with what we're calling noble reasoning. Noble reasoning can also be broken into an actual, a formal practice, like someone could, if they wanted to, sit down and go point by point by point as an exercise. Okay. So noble reasoning, we're starting with keeping our eye on the ball. What do we want and what do we not want? We want to be able to reside in the zone of sustainability. We don't want to reside in the zone of dissipation. Again, I'm referencing Dharma compass here. Neither sustainability or dissipation eternally exist. They're created by causes. So what we actually want is to know what those causes are and how to induce or produce or activate the causes. The associated cause number one for creating creating and residing in the zone of sustainability is intellectually grasping who we are, why we're here, where we've come from, and where we're going. In other words, that's the problem, right? What's preventing us from residing in sustainability as often or as frequently as we'd like is we have no idea who we are, why we're here, where we've come from, and where we're going. We first need to gain an intellectual understanding of that. In other words, how are we related to our environment and its inhabitants? How are we related to our environment and its inhabitants? And then the associated second cause would be then directly experiencing the revelation of that. In other words, the entire path revolves around the central theme of the revelation of identity. So noble reasoning is basically a contemporary version of stages of the path as a theory that outlines the things we can practice. that take us closer and closer and closer to the revelation of identity. So here we go. Okay, so noble reasoning step one is the aspiration to acknowledge, to admit to ourselves that we don't know who we are, why we're here, where we come from, and where we're going. We call that sense of spiritual homelessness. In other words, I don't belong here. I need to go back to, the 12th dimension, Aramatena Stargate. I'm trying to go through Sedona real quick and get into my light body and just be out of here or something, right? Like we feel like we don't belong here. We feel like we're not at home. There are very few places that we go and we feel that we're at home and deeply related to the individuals in that place. Most of our lives, we feel like we don't belong where we are. And that is called sense of spiritual homelessness. When we feel like we don't belong somewhere, we also feel like we're not responsible for that place. Okay, and from the jump, that's why I was saying, I don't know, last week or 2 weeks ago, there's a massive price to pay to enter the path called, am I willing to accept what the lineage suggests about my identity, that I do belong, that I am at home, and that thing that's preventing me from feeling that or recognizing that, that's the entire work, okay? So step one, acknowledge that I don't really know what's going on, and when that arises, or when that's there, I don't feel responsible for the environment or its inhabitants, right? And again, I use the hand example. Imagine that you didn't feel that your hand was a part of you and you put it on the stove or you put it in a fire and just gradually it would just dissolve, right? Burn away. Step one, commitment to eradicating that sense of not belonging. Step two, aspiration to intellectually grasp, intellectually understand our relationship, the relationship that we have to our environment and its inhabitants. Step three, generating the aspiration to become stewards of our environment and its inhabitants. And that alone will represents a significant amount of fuel or heat that supports the transmutation or transformation process. Okay, step 4 through 6, we start, taking our vow to commit the rest of this life to cultivating the actions of our body, basically, our profession, our speech, our behavior. Step 5, the vow to cultivate the actions of our mind, basically, empathy, prayer, and aspirational bodhicitta. And then we didn't do it, but I forgot about being John Malkovich, floor 7.5. Step 5.5, we're someone to actually be stationed at step 5, through having mastered step 4 and 3 and 2, etc. That person would inevitably find a first teacher, at least, who would introduce that person to the concept of origination or the perfection of transcendent wisdom, which suggests that anything that's there is only there because it was caused, and that thing was caused, and that thing was caused. In other words, if the thing is there, it will become something else, and something else, and something else, and something else, and something else. So in other words, continuity of sense of self. So it only makes sense, if I'm going to keep going, that I would want to dedicate all my future lives to making the most of them as well, right? When we're ready for that, we can't go straight into that, but when we are ready for that, we are willing to take the Bodhisattva vow. May I become at all times, both now and forever, a protector of those without protection, a guide for those who have lost their way, a ship for those with oceans to cross, a sanctuary for those in danger, a lamp for those in the dark, and a servant to all those in need. For as long as space endures, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain to dispel the misery of the world. When we're ready, we take the Bodhisattva vow and just think about, the insanity of that for a moment. Just think about how, how hard life has been. You really want to keep doing it like that, forever, right? You know what I'm saying? Think of just touch that for a minute. You want to do this again and again and again and again, and have to be a baby and have to be bullied or have to get a job in a restaurant or have to whatever the hell, make all mistakes, get divorced, lose all your money, right? All again and again and again and again. Imagine, right, that there's some people around that have that degree of resilience inside of them. Right? Okay, anyway. So this is why it's called heroic, and this is why it's called heroic. A bodhisattva, a heroic being, I'm taking liberties with translation, as opposed to a sentient being. A noble sentient being is an individual vehicle practitioner, and a noble heroic being, level up, different species, is a practitioner of the universal vehicle. Okay, so we take the vow, having step 7, having taken the bodhisattva vow. Now we vow to cultivate ourselves in order to become capable of inspiring and educating others. It's not just enough to take the vow. Now I have to actually become capable of inspiring and educating others. In order to do that, step 8, I need to become a master of theory and practice. And in order to do that, in order to become a master of theory and practice, I need to find a teacher. And so this is step 9. When we find a teacher, we request teachings, and here we go. Okay, so this is still all review. I got to speed up. Okay, so I got to speed up. I got to go faster. No, I'm good. All right. So, and just to close that, because it's a lot, remember what we're talking about is suffering. We're talking about confusion. We're talking about the basic insanity that is the fact that we don't know for certain who we are, why we're here, where we come from, and where we're going. When someone comes up to you on the street or in the gas station and says, "Who am I? Why am I here? Where did I come from? Where am I going?" When someone comes up to you and says that, you think this person is having a mental breakdown. Meanwhile, all of us are going about our lives, driving around, working jobs, trying to get rich and famous or whatever the hell, not actually knowing for certain who we are, etc. This is why we call it basic insanity. Well, that's what we're talking about, eradicating that. The revelation of identity is the eradication of that. When I know who I am, why I'm here, where I've come from, and where I'm going, then I can navigate my life. I won't waste any time either at that point. Anyway, so this is what we're trying to do. We're practicing to eradicate that. We're talking about suffering. We're talking about basic insanity. We want to eradicate that, right? Why are we doing anything? Because it's that. Okay, and there's 2 reasons to do that. When we see basic insanity, etc., when we observe it in ourselves or in our environment, we think about, in other words, I'm saying how to practice and why. Do I want to suffer? I don't. Do I want to be insane? I don't. Am I a human? I think so. Is that thing over there also a human? I think so. Do I think that person wants to experience, the effects of being insane? No, probably not. So let me empathize. Wherever I see the effects of insanity, let me empathize first. I also do not want to experience pain like that or confusion. Let me pray that they can experience happiness and health. And then let me also aspire to be someone that can act to relieve the pain, right? Empathy, prayer, aspirational bodhicitta. That's commonality, but there's also the radical selfishness. It's better for me if no one's suffering. So let me first empathize. Let me secondly pray. And then let me third, try to figure out what I can do to make it better for them so that it's better for me. right? So that's the basis of practice, and then as well as that is the foundation upon which I should practice the personal instructions I receive. And so here we go into some personal instructions and coffee breaks. So we talked about getting to know ourselves. The mind-body complexes and the associated planes are the objects of familiarization. In other words, these are the personal instructions. These are some of the first personal instructions we receive. Hey, notice these things. Try to notice and observe these things called your gross mind-body complex, your subtle, right? Okay. And so here we go. Getting to know ourselves, starting to notice ourselves. What's essential here to practice, we're starting to practice is, again, to test everything. We're not just to believe that, the super subtle thing, everything's perfect. I don't, oh yeah. Or believe that I have some subtle thing, or believe that I have a soul. Like, see if I can actually experience that thing. Or if I can't, at least infer the validity of what's being proposed, right? About the anatomy and the ethical implications associated with that, right? And so again, how would I know, right? So let's say like I'm a perfect student or something. I meet a teacher, I request teachings, they say, here's the thing, right? How the hell would I know that New York is there? I've never been there. I'm not even close. And let's say I wanted to go to New York, but I've never been there. That means I don't know how to get there. So how would I know that my teacher knows, right? What the directions are to New York? I can't know that. I literally cannot know that my teacher knows the directions to New York. But I'm also not allowed to believe that my teacher knows the directions to New York. So this is the state. This is the reality of the state of beginning a practice. I want to go to New York, in other words, become enlightened, but I'm not, which means I don't know how to get there. Since I'm not enlightened, I can't tell who is or who isn't. So I don't know if my teacher is or is not, which also means that I don't know if my teacher knows the way to New York or the way of the path. I don't know that, right? That's the state of things. And so that's why testing is essential, because how do you know that you're in an authentic space? The first thing that a mentor is going to give us is something that we can experience. Notice that you have a voice in your head telling you all sorts of things. Oh, that's true. Notice that you're averse to certain situations and you're attracted to others. Oh, that's true. Etc. Right? So an authentic mentor will point out all these things that we're already familiar with in order to earn our trust a little bit at a time and try to encourage us to practice. Okay, so anyway, testing everything, the state of things, testing, and then following the recipe, right? An authentic mentor will lay practice out systematically, right? Again, I, the Yogi Baker, can create cakes at will. If you'd like to experience cakeness, it's amazing. If you'd like to experience it, just follow the recipe as outlined in the fundamental practices of the noble reasoning, right? And then here's the real here we start to go into crazy land. We're actually, even though we don't want to admit it, because life sucks so much, because they suck, because the left is full of crazy people. Woke people are crazy, MAGA people are crazy, whatever, right? It's hard to swallow the red pill of what is being proposed, that we're actually optimally positioned. We're actually optimally positioned to realize who we are, why we're here, where we've come from, and where we're going. And so let's get into some fun slides. We've all heard, again, this is me trying to incorporate local iconography, contemporary mindset and practice. This is me trying to incorporate that so that it's giving us something that we can work with and understand. So how is it possible that we're in the best possible situation? Or what do you mean, right? Or so we've heard of this idea of being made in the image of God. And in that statement, there are three concepts: that which is made, the image, and God. In other words, God is our super subtle mind-body complex. The image of God is our subtle mind-body complex. And that which is produced from the image is our gross mind-body complex. So in other words, we were already residing in we already are residing in the most essential part of us. And we cannot reside anywhere else other than inside of the most essential magical part of ourselves. We cannot reside anywhere other than inside of and surrounded by the most essential part of ourselves, right? In other words, God, in whom we live, move, and have our being. Sorry for blaspheming, Dharma, hardliners. Sorry for using the word God, but I'm trying to make a point. Okay. So this is a state of things. That's why we're optimally positioned. Everything is optimally positioned. Okay. So reviewing now this, let's get into a little sci-fi funness. The super subtle, again, just to review. So we've got the map of the United States. Hey, New York's there. New York is there on the map. Maybe. The super subtle mind-body complex, the Vajrayana secret vehicle, becomes what's called the truth body of someone who realizes their identity. A Buddha is someone who has realized who he or she is, why he or she is here, etc. Okay? So the super subtle, the practice associated with that is the Vajrayana, or secret vehicle, becomes the truth body of someone who wakes up. The subtle complex is associated with Mahayana. Universal vehicle becomes what's called the beatific body of a Buddha. I'm going to break this down. And the gross, or the Hinayana, or the foundational vehicle, the individual vehicle, becomes what's called the emanation body of a Buddha. These are called, I'm putting these here because I'm just, we're in crazy land, we're in sci-fi land. Let's have some fun, but also let's be traditional, because as we start to explore Buddhist anatomy, we're going to run into these ideas. And so I just want to put it out there for anyone who wants to nerd out on study. You're going to start to see these associations and relationships. So the three bodies of a Buddha. When someone wakes up, totally, for real, one wakes up to the truth body. When one wakes up for real, that one wakes up to the truth body and experiences everything as a part of herself or himself, as well as that thing being transcendently magical. So that's you could call that, we could say, this is the enlightenment, something. At which point that being, or awakened being, will create what's called a beatific body. Let me also remember, so we're in sci-fi crazy land, folks. But this is, okay, so the truth body obviously is associated with the super subtle mind-body complex. The beatific body is associated with the subtle mind-body complex. The beatific body is basically a perfected, what I'm calling psychophysical emanation projecting machine. In other words, it's an avatar generator, and it resides at and deploys from an ideal abode. Now, what the hell does that mean? What it means is Christ lived in heaven and came from heaven to earth. That's what it means. For example, right? Or the Buddha lived in Tushita heaven prior to becoming the Buddha on earth. For example, that's what it means, right? So there is the fact of reality, the truth body, as everything that exists. And then you could think of that as being the electricity that's all over the place. And the beatific body is like a transformer. It's something that's stepped down that can be relatable. How can someone relate to everything at once if that person is not a Buddha? How can I use electricity without a transformer? I'm going to make this point anyway. So I just want to make that clear what that means. There are, right. Avatars come from some ideal place. They live there. They go on missions, and then they go back, etc. And then the emanation body, a physical incarnation as a human being. This is called what's called a world teaching Buddha. Okay, just trying to make it fun, but also just in case someone's going ham on study, trying to really put these things together. When they're talking about emanation, beatific, or truth bodies, they're talking about our own anatomy, what we can activate, what's already there. We just aren't seeing. Okay. So let's talk about the implications really quickly. The implications of the super subtle mind body, and so this basically is the basis for almost all ethics. Period. Right. This is the basics for all ethics. Period. Is that right? Crazy mofos. I went to the mountaintop and I met God, and now we got to do this, right? So crazy mofos go hard in the paint, make contact, and then come back suggesting things about how we should act, right? And that comes from direct experience with the super subtle mind body complex. All ethics, period, basically, all spiritual ethics, full stop, period, basically come from direct contact with our own super subtle mind body complex, right? All ethics come from just a recognition of what the hell's going on in here, basically. Okay. So that what our teachers will propose to us that we don't want to accept at first is that we've never actually been anywhere else other than at peace and at home. The only place that we will ever be is at peace and at home. But obviously we're not acting like this because we don't know that. We're not experiencing that. That's the implication of the super subtle mind body complex. We were talking about, someone who experiences the super subtle as nuclear buzz, but basically the super subtle is the factory and the assembly line and the workers and the toys, right? It's like everything. So is all our super subtle mind body complex. Again, we're reviewing our super subtle mind body complex is all planes of existence. The nature of our super subtle mind body complex is infinity in time, infinity in space, and infinity in knowledge. All times, all objects, all events, all relationships, and all satisfaction that comes from something that has, a will to satisfy its longings. Okay, so the experience of the super subtle mind body complex would be then therefore connecting to all times, all objects, and all satiations at once. And so the revelation were someone to experience that person would realize, oh, I'm alive, and I've always been alive, and I always will be alive because I recognize a sense of connection to all objects. I don't feel threatened by that, right? Do you feel connected to your elbow? Do you feel a connection to your elbow? Try hitting your elbow, on a wall, on a brick. And then you tell me if you recognize a connection to your elbow. Okay, right. Obviously, we feel connected to our elbows. Obviously. But this is like, okay. Do you feel threatened by your elbow? Do you feel connected to your ankle? Are you threatened by your ankle? Okay, so notice that where you feel connected, or the objects to which you feel connected actually They don't threaten you. Anyway, I want to go ahead, but this is essential, right? So in other words, the most powerful peace, total peace, is the same as total power because it's a state of not being threatened. Anyway, okay, so that's why God is qualified as omnipotent in Western terms. That same idea is conceptually translated as omnipotence because there's no one's threatened. Anyway, and then omniscience as it relates to understanding what things want, not as it pertains to the cosine of something, right? Omniscience specifically talking about the capacity to know what sentient beings want, basically, and understanding cause and effect. Okay. And so what the Buddha said as the Buddha, was drying out from that experience is uncomplicated, uncreated, profound peace. Okay, and so then our teachers will tell us this, and we're like, I don't want to believe it. Let's review again quickly our gross mind-body complex, which exists inside of the gross plane, as we discussed, which is inside of the subtle, which is inside of the super subtle. So when we examine the machinery that we operate most frequently, we will notice that we have a sense of self in there. We recognize that there's something in there that everything is coming to, or like going, it's like the thing in the middle. I'm just going to call it a sense of self. We say I. Who's sitting in the chair? I am. Anyway, but when we look for the sense of self, we can't locate it, right? I don't want to go on a tangent, but okay. We're familiar with, that we remember things, that we can imagine things. If we examine, we'll notice that we are coloring our sense of self, meaning we are actively maintaining a narrative, an archetypal narrative. I'm this way. I'm an artist. I'm a mom. I'm a rebel, I'm a good person or something. We're coloring that sense of I in some way. We're receiving impressions, based on how the active, archetypal narrative maintenance. We start to create values, right? Like I look at that thing and not that thing. I want that thing and not that thing. That archetype narrative maintenance speaks a certain way in our mind, right? And it emotes. In other words, it's proud of itself when it is in proximity to what it values, and it's depressed when it's not in proximity to what it values, right? Notice that your emotions are directly related to the proximity to the thing you value. You're just like qualifying it as like, yay, I'm close to the thing I want, or my life sucks because I'm far away from the thing I want. Okay, so just know, right? Okay, then obviously we're familiar with our gross body. The gross body seems to want things. It wants to eat. It wants to play. It wants to get jiggy, whatever, right? It does its thing, and it also words and sound come out of it. Okay. So here we go. Damn, time is flying. I will do the best I can to get through. So what the hell then is the subtle mind-body complex? Because that's the whole point of today, right? So also there's a sense of self there, as we discussed last week. You could think of, again, thinking of the image of God, and then the image of that. We're talking about the image, the relational part, the thing that someone can relate to. So, or the generator of all gross mind-body complexes, right? So inside of the subtle mind are all of the different types of ways that a gross mind can color itself. All of the different archetype narratives are there. All memories are there. All hopes and fears, in other words, the values, right? All the different hopes and fears are there in the subtle mind, as well as all of the virtues and by the aspirations. right? So hopes and fears, virtues, vices, aspirations, and their opposites are all there in the subtle mind. And in the subtle body are all of the different programs that basically become the, like the workers of the archetypes. They like put it into the bodies. There's an advanced, neural network in the subtle body. There are satiation cycles, what are traditionally known as chakras. We're going to go over satiation cycles next week. Those satiation cycles are in the subtle body. What are called the primal energies are in the subtle body. And what we're calling ancestral artifacts are in the subtle body. We will go over all of this next week. So that's what the subtle body is. But what can it become? What the subtle body can become is the bridge to God, or the bridge to enlightenment. And when it does that, then it reflexively, it becomes the salvific force of God, or the world teaching Buddha, right? It becomes the avatar, basically. The subtle mind-body complex can become our bridge to New York City, our bridge to God, our bridge to enlightenment. And when it does, reflexively, it becomes the avatar body, basically, right? The avatar generator, something like that. Again, welcome to Sci-Fi Land, folks. The truth is stranger than fiction. Just pointing some things out here. Again, being traditional by incorporating what's available. On the left, you'll see the rainbow bridge. That's the subtle body. That's the subtle body connecting that little platform to the kingdom of heaven, right? On the right, looking at a painting that's depicting the exact same idea. There is something that can be traversed, something that was constructed and can be traversed, that can save that aspirant, that ascetic aspirant, 100% committed. That dude who's standing on that rock, on that Rourke painting, is 100% committed to embracing the divinity. Is completely committed to embracing the divinity, and is about to begin, walking the path to doing that. Anyway, the bridge between where we are and where we want to be, that is the subtle mind-body complex. The bridge between where we are and where we want to be, or who we want to be, is mastering the theory and practice associated with the subtle mind-body complex. In other words, mastering the theory and practice associated with the universal vehicle, becoming, transforming ourselves into universal vehicle practitioners that represents the path that takes us from where we currently are to where we want to be, or to whom we want to become. The universal vehicle teaches us how to bridge the gap between ourselves and God, or technically how to become capable of directly experiencing our super subtle mind-body complex as directly as we experience our gross complex. Quoting the great Hodorowski, what is the goal of life? It is to create yourself a soul. What is the goal of life? We just go all the way back to not being the micro dog that's barking at everyone and trying to bite everyone's ankles, and be TikToked out, glammed out. The goal of life is to create yourself a soul, according to this crazy guy, right? According to this crazy guy, goal is to figure out how to build that bridge. Now, coming back to being made in the image of God, approaching God. We can believe, let's say, I can believe in God. I could believe in God. I could even subscribe to the ethical implications, that correspond to an intellectual grasp of the super subtle complex. But we cannot approach, physically, experientially approach and commune with God, experience God, without there being first an image through which we can familiarize ourselves with the manifest, tangible, and relational qualities of God, right? Again, forgive me for blaspheming. Dharma hardliners, please forgive me for blaspheming, but I'm using something that we can all understand. The Christ is the essential component. In other words, we cannot relate with God without there being some redeeming element, component, person, right? So we need, if we're going to experience God, if we're going to become enlightened, right, we need to first practice and understand the image of what that is. In other words, okay, so approaching God, here we go. The Redeemer, so the subtle complex is Christ, basically, right? The avatar complex, we could call it, is Christ, basically. Therefore, Bodhisattva, and what Christ did is help people become united with their own dignity, reality, essential goodness. What the Christ did was to help people become reunited with their own dignity, autonomy, goodness, sanity, right? Okay, right? And that's what bodhisattvas are trying to do that, right? We're trying to steward, we're trying to help, trying to relieve suffering, right? We're trying to relieve suffering. Therefore, bodhisattvas aspire to master the theory and practice of the subtle complex, in other words, of the universal vehicle, in order to bring maximum benefit to maximum beings. In Christian terms, this is called imitation of Christ. It can be, right? We're trying to first form that bridge and then become that type of thing. Okay. Buddhification. Familiarization with the subtle mind-body complex simultaneously takes us to God, to enlightenment, to New York City. And when we go to New York, then okay, cool. I know how to get to New York, right? And then it transforms us into emissaries of New York City, right? The subtle mind, familiarization with, in other words, mastery of the subtle mind-body complex simultaneously takes us to New York and then transforms us into emissaries of New York City. In Buddhist terms, total familiarization with and mastery of the subtle mind-body complex is required in order to become a Buddha. And then once Buddhified, we become reflexively motivated to inspire others and educate them about how to become Buddhas. Now, again, why? Because as the subtle mind-body complex, as the theory of the subtle mind-body complex suggests, everything is already a part of ourselves. And so if we were to know that, we would naturally, reflexively, instinctively be motivated to help support the health and well-being of everything that's already a part of ourselves. So once Buddhified, we become reflexively motivated to support the health and well-being of everything that's already a part of ourselves. Okay. And just pulling from the traditions, just touching this so that we don't think we're crazy people. Quoting from the commentary on Atisha's lamp, in the state of enlightenment, our wisdom truth body is the fulfillment of our own highest aims, meaning the revelation of the revelation of who I am is the thing I've been looking for the whole time. And so in the state of enlightenment, that revelation is the fulfillment of our own highest aims, and then reflexively, once Buddhified, then our form bodies, our emanation, and our beatific bodies help fulfill or support the well-being of others. Again, I'm talking about crazy land. These ideas can feel very narcissistic and crazy, but all we're talking about is the relationship, whether or not, again, these ideas can feel extremely narcissistic and crazy, but all we're talking about is whether or not we're related to our environment and its inhabitants. And if so, what are the implications? In what capacity? What is the nature of that relationship? That's all we're talking about. Okay. I think I got a couple more, but this computer's being crazy. Okay. Right, just getting the cosine from Emerson and Atisha. Do the push-ups and you'll have the pecs. Do the squats and you'll have the booty. I'm trying to prep for next week. how can we really begin this practice of formally, formally familiarizing ourselves with subtle mind-body complex? In other words, formally familiarizing ourselves with Christness. In other words, starting to build a bridge to God. In other words, creating our soul. In Hodorowski terms, how do we start to do that for real? For real, is two concepts that really help. These have been again contemporized concepts. One of them is called archetypal fluidity, which is basically a Dharma compass-esque resource for the subtle mind, and the Symphony of Seven. We're going to go over these next week. And so if anyone would like to prepare, let's also really quickly touch, calling here the indestructible. Why are we doing any of these things? Why? Remember why we're doing all of this. The universal vehicle, Bodhisattva vehicle, is all about why. Motive. Right? Remember that we are we've become intellectually certain that we're related to our environment. We're as related to our environment and its inhabitants as we are to our elbows or our hands. And when our hands are threatened, we instinctively, reflexively eradicate the pain of the hand at the level of cause, right? So we're as related to, remember, we've been thinking and we've discovered, at least intellectually, that we're as related to our environment and its inhabitants as we are our own hand. They are as integral to our sense of self as our hands are, for example, and therefore we're willing to take this vow. May I become at all times, both now and forever, a protector of those without protection, a guide for those who have lost their way, a ship for those with oceans to cross, a sanctuary for those in danger, a lamp for those in the dark, and a servant to all those in need. For as long as space endures, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then, may I too remain to dispel the misery of the world. We're generating the indestructible why, right? In other words, really, really digging into and starting to get into the Bodhisattva vehicle, which is, again, associated with the second turning or the universal vehicle. It is the Bodhisattva vehicle is the compassion that is the byproduct of the perfection of transcendent wisdom. It's identity-based. It's action, the action that follows. Yeah, that's good. Definitely. The Bodhisattva vehicle, the universal vehicle, is the action all about the actions that are associated with the revelation of identity. If everything that I experience is the most essential part of me, if everything that I experience is the most essential part of me, and if any essential part of me is suffering, then I will act to eradicate that suffering by eradicating the causes of that suffering. This is the Bodhisattva vehicle summed up. If everything I experience is the most essential part of me, and if any essential part of me is suffering, I will act to eradicate that suffering by addressing the root causes of that suffering. Now, how do we practice this? Again, indestructible motive, mental vigilance, and constant remembering, which are skills that are developed on the Eightfold Path. We'll get into the skills in a few weeks, how to really build those skills. But I just want to remind us of that language that we've used. The skill of mental vigilance and the skill of constant remembering of this indestructible motive, which is the truth of shared identity and origination. Again, we're talking about how do we really practice, how do we start to mature into this? Having recognized intellectually how deeply dependent we are on our environment and its inhabitants, and having the courage to be invested in the well-being of the environment and its inhabitants as we are ourselves. We're willing to start to do these practices. So mental vigilance, constant remembering of the indestructible motive, which we just went over, total commitment to becoming an inspiration, a living demonstration of mastery of the fundamental vehicle, the foundational vehicle, the Hinayana, the Eightfold Path, total commitment to master that foundational vehicle, and also then total commitment to become an educator. In other words, to master what the content that we're discussing today. And just to yeah. So contemporary, indestructible motive, shared identity for real. Everything I experience is the most essential part of me. Everything that I experience is actually the most essential part of me. Everything that I experience is actually the most essential part of me. Everything that I experience is actually the most essential part of me. Constant remembering. And everything I experience is actually the most essential part of me. And therefore, it only makes sense to be totally invested in its well being, to take care of it. Because everything that I experience is the most essential part of me, it only makes sense to take care of it. Okay. And then being discerning about that. And that I always make the joke about not giving your body away to every tiger you see, because that used to be a thing that would happen, right? We would get so we would lose our discernment, right? So remember that we're rooting for everyone, but we're going to be discerning in how much we give to make sure that we're also taking care of ourselves so that we can continue to be invested actively in the protection of the environment. Talking about this more, preparation for next week. Next week, we will go over archetypal fluidity. If anyone has the updated books of More Human, More Diamond, that's pages 75 through 79. Archetypal fluidity basically outlines the major skills. In other words, all the virtues and challenges that are associated with all archetypes that bodhisattvas develop in order to become inspiring and be able to educate. Right. So archetypal fluidity is going to talk about all of the different types of costumes that bodhisattvas master. The Symphony of Seven is kind of like a hybrid of psychological as well as physical attributes of subtle mind-body complex. I listen to a lot of podcasts and I hear people talking about Nietzsche's concept of there being multiple different personalities residing inside of us, all of them vying for to be in the driver's seat. And so I feel, as crazy as this is, but that we're, Western, modern psychologists and academics and intellectuals to encounter, how the satiation cycles are outlined from the lineage, that might be the answer to all the different things that they're talking about this will wanting that, and this will wanting that, and this will wanting that. So we'll go over that next week as well. Going to start introducing a couple concepts. Sorry, I know we're going over, so sorry, but got a couple more slides. We're going to start talking about, I'm just calling it wholeness, but traditionally these are called the two collections, right? So basically, as bodhisattvas are growing, are cultivating themselves, there's two types of teachings, or there's two different fundamental qualities. Like, in other words, an archetype is basically a wisdom archetype or a compassion archetype, basically. So we could sum up the skills as being two skills, basically. The skill of wisdom and the skill of compassion, or what's called the merit, right? And so wisdom, so I'm just going to touch these real quick. This will be something that we'll start to review a lot also, because these are the two things, essentially, the two essential skills that bodhisattvas are trying to cultivate. And then when moment of revelation is there, it's both of those things at the same time. Okay, so wisdom is something to be earned. Wisdom is something to be earned or acquired. Wisdom is something to be earned or acquired. Compassion means giving it away. So notice that what we're talking about is basically the synthesis of two opposites. When we're talking about wholeness, we're talking about the synthesis of two opposites. So wisdom is something to come in. Compassion it goes away, right? Wisdom sees unity. Compassion sees diversity. Wisdom is about attraction and sex, right? Merging, attraction, sex. Compassion is about unmerging or repelling. Or when you think about, I'm going to repel the empire's advance. I'm going to repel the Vikings. So protection, right? Wisdom is about attraction. Compassion is about protection, basically. Sex, violence, attraction, repulsion. Wisdom is about, art and music. Um, yes. Critical thinking versus concentration. You'll see this language a lot, especially when we start to talk about the techniques, the actual familiarization techniques. Critical thinking is associated with wisdom, how things are related. Concentration, you can really think of it in terms of the potency of a thing, how concentrated it is. Not just that I can look at something and hold my attention there, but how concentrated, how strong is it, right? Critical thinking is about the recognition of connection, sensitivity, in other words. Wisdom is about motive, why. Compassion is the action that is what's derived from or the byproduct of the motive. Wisdom is about mind. Compassion is about body. Again, we'll go over all of these more moving forward. And just talking about, again, an essential um, philosophical theoretical point about the universal vehicle is, the three incalculable eons. But basically, what we're talking about when we're talking about the perfection of transcendent wisdom or the nature of reality is that things continue. Something evolved into this thing, and it will evolve into another thing, and it will evolve into another thing, and it will evolve into another thing. Or it will keep going, right? And therefore, we've got time, but the implication, is that really what we're talking about, what bodhisattvas are attempting to do is stamp or imprint, like check off various skills, right? Then they're stamping them onto something that's called a continuum, that can be called a spiritual gene. Sometimes this is referred to as the indestructible drop in the heart. You can think of it as like the core programming of how we then like come out into the world. Like it will, like an oak seed or something, right? An oak seed evolves into an oak tree. So what bodhisattvas are trying to do are reprogramming. Bodhisattvas are trying to reprogram that seed so that certain behaviors unfold, right? And obviously we have time. We have incarnations upon incarnations in order to do that. Just remembering, how do we know that we're practicing properly? We will start to feel more and more invested in the well-being of our environment and its inhabitants. That is the way to know that we're practicing properly. Empathy, prayer, aspirational bodhicitta, personal instruction. How do you know you're doing it right? Is you'll start to feel invested in other people's well-being, and you'll want to do something about it. And you'll realize, well, if I'm going to do anything about it, then I have to become more inspiring, and I have to really become more of a master of theory and practice. Right? Am I singularly motivated to give all of this away? Why am I doing this? How inspiring am I? How well-versed, how masterful of an educator am I? And then what's up with my own realization? Thank you for being patient. We went over. I, the Yogi Baker, have practiced just this. Shout out Atisha. Anyone who wishes to experience the deliciousness of cakeness, please follow the recipe. We'll set a quick timer for questions. I know that was a lot. Thank you for going over time with us. Happy Sunday, folks. We'll see you next week. We will continue to do more and more deep dive into subtle mind-body complex, archetypal fluidity, symphony of seven, universal vehicle, career of the bodhisattva, LFG, precious human life, LFG, precious human life, LFG, precious human life. See y'all next week.